Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Reducing Risk and Increasing Awesome talk on multi-platform development. My name is Alex Schwartz. I'm the chief scientist, founder, and CEO of Alchemy Labs. Also the janitor every once in a while, because at a small studio, you kind of have to do it all.
I'm Devin Reimer. I am CTO, as we call it, Chief Technical Owl at Alchemy Labs, and I'm Canadian.
Here's a photo of our workspace. That's Albert Einstein, our lab owl. We're known for a couple original games that we created in the past. Our first game was called Snuggle Truck, or Smuggle Truck, depending on where you hear about it. It was a game about taking a bunch of stuffed animals in the back of a rusty truck and driving them over the border to a zoo to get them free healthcare. We were lucky enough to garner some awards for that game. We launched that on Steam, PC, Mac, and Linux, and we also put it on iOS and Android and a number of other platforms. We followed that up with a game called Jack Lumber, which is a game about a supernatural lumberjack where a tree killed your granny and you're out to get revenge on the forest, like any lumberjack story. And so you chop logs in the sky in bullet time. We also garnered some awards for that. We were lucky enough to have people notice that game. We also worked on a game called for the Awesome, which is a base jumping and skydiving game that was a collaboration with Decouple Games. That's a game where you dive off of a futuristic, dive through a futuristic city while skirting buildings, catching score plates, and smacking into birds. And we ported that game over to Unity, brought it to mobile and Mac and Linux.
So relatively recently, we did a port of for the Awesome called Oculus, and it added VR support to the game. And very, very recently, as in 3 days ago, we shipped DK2 support for it. And it is currently one of the most downloaded games on the Oculus Share Store, and is available on Steam. Currently working on a game called Discourse. It's an adventure survival narrative game that is very choice heavy. You play a character that has survived a plane crash on a deserted island, and you end up being with a group of people that are not the kind of people you want to survive with. And there's a lot of moral gray area choices. Okay, so let's jump into it. Why should you do multi-platform development? Multi-platform development is a really long term. It takes up a lot of room on slides.
There goes the bike.
Yeah. It takes up a lot. Hello, test. There we go. It takes up a lot of room on slides, so we ended up replacing it with this icon.
Yeah. So why should you do multi-platform development? Basically, Unity did all of the work for you, right? Yeah. You'd be throwing away money not to. You just hit the big red button to export it, and you get all of your games on all the platforms pretty much instantly, right? Okay, maybe that's not exactly the case, but what it really means is that porting has become not as much of a technical endeavor. It's more about the choice from a business standpoint of when and where and how and what platforms to bring your game to. So in that sense, we are splitting the talk into two parts. We're talking first about the business aspect, or kind of the mental side of where should I be porting and how should I come about doing these ports. And we also have a tech portion. So I'm going to start off with the biz portion of the talk. So it's extremely important to note that when you're distributing your games to multi-platform, to all these different platforms, you're ending up reducing your risk by increasing stability, and in the sense that you have a lot of platforms out there currently that are very hit-driven and also holiday sales-driven. So you have Steam, and you have your summer sale and your winter sale, and you have a huge spike of revenue, and then you have long tails of emptiness. But if you have multiple platforms all combining, you have this kind of wave canceling out effect where you have a much smoother cash flow for your company over time. So releasing games on multiple platforms is definitely helpful from that standpoint. Also, again, you have the long tail sales effect where, in the sense that if you're shipping multiple games on multiple platforms and you've kind of like built an original IP and then you're making your next game and your next game, you have to think about the fact that over time, a year out, 2 years out, you're still getting drip income from these old games, and the long tail can actually be thick enough to sustain your company if you're lucky enough in that sense. It also, you can avoid putting all your eggs in one basket. In case a platform goes completely out of business, that's out of your control, you want to be bringing your games to a lot of different places just to kind of avoid that situation where you've been screwed over by a single platform and their choices external to your company. It's also important to note that porting your games to multiple platforms increases the value, especially of your back catalog. So use a Humble Bundle there, good old games and all that. Your older titles are still extremely valuable, and we find a lot of indies completely disregard this concept, and they say, okay, we made this game, didn't do so well. Well, next game, let's work on the next game. And so it's very developer focused and very, release a game and hope that we hit Angry Birds success. But I think when you have portability of your games, you're able to generate value out of them, and Unity's giving us that value. And when you have the opportunities, the doors are open to take advantage of new opportunities because of Unity.
So it also increases visibility. Every time you release a title, like a new platform, what ends up happening is you get a natural bump on all the other platforms. A platform release can be a press event unto itself. And then when you end up having a successful title that you're going to bring to other platforms, what ends up happening is those platform holders get excited because they've seen what it did on other platforms, and they'll end up doing extra marketing and other perks and stuff like that. It also increases the notoriety of your company. There's a lot of people that are very siloed, right? They play only console games, or they play only mobile games, or only games on PC. By shipping games across all these different platforms means there's more people going to know who you are, which ends up helping your reputation, and that becomes very, very valuable. So a note, a lot of those are what we call soft gains, right? They're super hard to measure. So what we do is we think about it as the long game, so 5+ years into the future. Building this goodwill ends up doing things that are unexpected possibly at the time. So for example, it helps you dealing with publishers when you build that notoriety, do things like crowdfunding. We successfully kickstarted Discourse, and partnerships, business relationships with other people and companies. So this ends up causing what we call is the business domino effect. It's the what happens a year plus from now when you do something that you think is valuable but might not have a monetary value behind it. This comes in forms of opportunities.
So the last piece of evidence as to why you should be doing multi-platform development is anecdotally it worked for us. So we have multiple games that we've shipped on multiple platforms, and when you look at kind of cash flow over time at our company, you see that we're getting checks month to month from various places, which really helps with long-term sustainability. So having games on Steam, you're getting checks from Valve. You have Humble Bundles every once in a while if you can talk your way into that. You have Google Play and you have iOS. And we worked with Union in the past, which brought our games to a couple platforms that we weren't able to reach. We ported our games to Windows Phone and BlackBerry. We'll talk about that. And we also have games on the Oculus Share, which are not generating money right now, but they're generating value in that kind of long-term sense. We also did a deal with Leap Motion and HP, which we'll talk about. Did some experimentation with bringing our games to the web. We also have a tool in the asset store, which has brought in a surprising amount of money compared to some of the other platforms that you'd think would be making more money. So just to kind of give you a snapshot of our private books here, here's a slide showing the overall lifetime value generated by each platform at Alchemy Labs over our 4 years in business, where iOS is combining kind of the Playhaven ads that we had when Snuggle Truck went free, and that was a large chunk of the iOS section. But you can see here Steam, Humble, and the 15%, that is also the others, which I've broken down into a separate pie chart, which is made of our Google Play, Windows Phone deal, BlackBerry, Leap, and other platforms. So it's not all in one spot, and it was, all the revenue was diversified and came in at different times, so we didn't have dry spells. And so yeah, multi-platform development, it is all roses. Everything is wonderful, right? But I just kind of want to go into how people approach multi-platform development wrong, and a couple lessons learned there. A lot of people we see overpromise platforms, and that becomes a really big problem. People just kind of tossing out ports left and right. You get a port and you get a port. Especially on Kickstarter, I find it hilarious to see games that, okay, we have a $15,000 goal for our massive open world RPG MMO, and for an extra $4,000 on our stretch goal, we're going to ship PS4, woo! Right? And so it just shows so much of a lack of knowledge about what's involved with console cert and all that kind of process of bringing a game to another platform. So overpromising platforms, definitely one of the downfalls.
Another very common one is targeting the wrong platform. So there is wrong platforms for your game. So like twin stick shooter on iPhone, not a good idea. As most of you can attest, virtual buttons on a touchscreen are less than optimal.
Notice a lot of people completely avoid porting in general. I notice that sometimes that's kind of the old guard. I was from the console world, and now I'm in Unity, and I'm assuming that ports are just gonna, it's something I externalize. I get another company to handle it because it's so much work. I can't be focusing on that while doing, my core development.
On the flip side of that, thinking that multi-platform development is effortless. Yeah, the amount of people we talk to are like, yeah, I'm going to ship on 7 platforms. Maybe not the greatest idea for your first title.
You just click the red button, though.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Not focusing on the future, like you said about playing the long game. If you're only playing the short game, that might end up getting you into a corner that you can't work your way out of, which kind of goes into the next thing.
Not planning for technical change. So if you don't think ahead and build your content in such a way that you can support multi-platform development, it's going to end up being hacks on top of hacks on top of hacks, which is going to make your life so much worse. Okay, so how should you approach multi-platform development correctly? So first off, it starts with asking yourself this question: have I done my homework on this particular platform? So here's something that we see. The kind of zero evaluation on a platform. So one is blind platform devotion. I love Nintendo. Nintendo's the greatest. I have a Nintendo, therefore I am going to Wii U. And then another one is, hey, I've heard of all these games, these crashy, candy crashing, flapping, wingy, birdie crushing, angry temple games making millions of dollars. I should just go to that platform. So why is it so important that you properly evaluate platforms? The last thing you want to do is get yourself burned. Particularly at a small studio, time is at a premium. Ports can be very costly, and the last thing you want is a version of your game that is terrible on one platform. So something that makes this really hard is when you're thinking about porting a game, you're never launching it the moment that you're thinking about it. You're launching it at some later date. So the current value of a platform at this particular moment is not nearly as valuable of information as what that platform will be at the time of launch. So how do you predict the future? Magic? Well, there's some ways to try to deal with this. Predicting the future is incredibly hard. Stats, by definition, are inherently backwards looking. This industry, compared to most, moves incredibly quickly. And the last thing you want to do is build something for the past. So how do you go about making some sort of prediction of where things are going to go? Start by doing your research. Why stats are backwards looking, if you collect enough of them and you're smart about things, you can extrapolate upon them. One that I think is probably the most valuable is talk to other people that have been through the pipe over beers. That's how you're going to find out the most stuff, the warning signs, the pros and cons of platforms, people that have been in the trenches already. It's very important to stay up to date with the industry. Be active on Reddit, check out news sites, be on Twitter. You will find a lot more information that way than if you're just not paying attention to the world around you.
So before we hit the technical notes on the actual porting process, I just kind of want to go over the signs that we feel as indies make for a good, healthy platform. I think the first one is definitely discovery, right? So can users find your game? Now, I think it's important to note that there are a lot of platforms where there's a lot of releases happening, but I think it's important to look at the volume of visible releases, not necessarily on the entire ecosystem as a whole. So if 1,000 games are coming out on Steam every day, but a normal user is coming and seeing kind of like 10 or 15 highlighted, featured games, that's a much healthier platform than seeing a basically alphabetical sorted list of all the games that have come out yesterday. I think from a discovery and platform quality rating, you want platforms to feature based on the merit of the game, not on someone buying their way to a feature slot on that platform. And by that token, you want a balanced profit distribution among the games that are on that platform. So hopefully the top 1% of earners on that, in the top grossing are not taking the lion's share of the overall revenue going out of that platform. So in that sense, iOS at this point may not be the healthiest platform, especially when it comes to indie development. You also want to be looking at. Oh yeah.
One thing that was not mentioned there was about user acquisition.
Yeah.
If a platform's primary driver of users is via paid user acquisition, that is a very scary place to go, particularly as a small studio.
Yeah. And focusing on paid titles, which is what we're doing at the moment. You also want to be looking at the future potential of said platform. So looking at things like what's the growth of the platform? Is it moving in a positive direction? Are they innovating and trying to change things that are broken about their platform, or are they stagnant? And you also kind of get the chicken and the egg thing where you have, if you have developer interest building games for said platform, that means that there was, to some extent, the concept of consumer interest because they kind of feed each other in that loop, whereas games and eyeballs are connected in that way. So in that sense, early platforms can, not will, but can be really good for indies. If you're able to move quickly and you're able to get your games to an early platform, hopefully there's a high consumer interest and maybe just for competition's sake, a low developer interest. That would be the optimal. I'm the only guy there, but all the consumers are there waiting for games. Kind of wishful thinking. But as far as potential and rating that, here's a warning sign. If a platform, when you ask them about their sales numbers and their projections, they're hiding all their figures and saying, oh, we can't really talk about it, that's usually a sign that they are terribly ashamed of the numbers for said platform. So just a note.
So another very good thing to take into account is the timing of when you're going to launch in that platform's life cycle. So as we mentioned before, early platforms, inherently they have the highest risk because you don't have stats. It's harder to talk to people who've been through the pipe if it's a very new platform. But it does have the higher chance of explosive growth because you don't know what that platform is going to do. If you catch the right platform in the early enough stage, you can end up riding that rocket up. And then on the flip side, mature platforms, our platforms have been around for a while, people have been through the pipe, you've possibly been through the pipe, you know kind of what to expect. These are generally the lower risk option, and you have a better chance of moderate success because you know what the moderate success is going to be. One that people sometimes overlook is how much the platform holders actually care. It's a partnership when you end up working with a platform holder. You have to make sure that your interests align, right? You have to make sure that that platform holder, it's in their best interest for you to succeed. You're looking for solid developer relations. The ability to talk to a human and talk to a human quickly is incredibly important. Take a look at the development tools. Generally, the better the development tools are, the more that they are thinking about supporting that developer and hoping that making them succeed. And then focused on the platform's success. We've seen this a few times where the people that are platform holders are super excited about the platform, but they're not really pushing the platform in a way that's going to make it successful.
And those are all relevant tips for pretty much any business deal, not just working with platforms. Again, it's a partnership. But OK, so with all that, platforms are never perfect. And how do you deal with all this risk? So every time you sign a deal with a new, distributing with a new platform, you are putting yourself and your company at more liability and all these kinds of things. So how do we deal with mitigating that risk? We have kind of one actionable, pragmatic solution to that is to ask for advances on revenue share from said platform. So what I mean by that, if you're not familiar, is we're going to be selling to consumers, and you would be asking the platform for some number of dollars upfront as an advance on the money that will be made and earned out. So they would then get that money raked back or recouped, and then you'd start getting paid back after that advance was fulfilled. So that's a really good way of dealing with risk. And if a platform's willing to do that for you, it shows a lot of trust in their own product for your game to earn out, right? So if they're not willing to put down whatever amount it is that you're at, some small upfront amount, that might show that they are afraid that the game won't even earn out in that sense. And we have had experiences where that has bridged the gap from, I don't know if this platform's really going to work for us, to, OK, it's now worthwhile because of the secured upfront advance, lowering our risk. And I think that all goes into that kind of general category of wheeling and dealing and talking to humans and having good developer relations. I think it can never hurt to ask about ways that your platform can reduce risk on your end. Some platforms give advances, some platforms do not, but they have other support mechanisms to make it easier for you to bring your games to their platform. So we worked with the Windows 8 team through their App Campus program in order to bring some of our popular mobile iOS games over to Windows Phone, which was helpful to reduce the risk for us. Same with BlackBerry. They were able to provide some assistance as far as the porting process. Also, we did an interesting deal with HP, where if you buy any of their NV laptops, which have a Leap Motion built into the actual laptop hardware, it ships with Jack Lumber Leap Motion enabled on the hard drive. So you can chop logs with your finger in front of the laptop. And so being a pre-installed game was a good way to get that money up front as a deal that we worked out with them.
And we would never thought that was even a possibility if it wasn't for the fact that we were talking to these platform holders.
Right. But again, on all this evaluation stuff that we're talking about, you might be completely 100% wrong about everything you're thinking. Predicting the future, you might be totally wrong. Unexpected disappointment happens a lot. I guess it should be expected disappointment at this point. There's no guarantee to success, such as life, right? But unexpected wins do happen, and certain platforms might not look like the best place to be, but the value of being first, novel, or getting lucky could usurp that whole evaluation.
So the next question to ask is, have you thought about if your game actually makes sense on this platform? So as I mentioned earlier, you got to think a lot about your controls and how you could bring them to other platforms. The control mechanisms on a lot of different platforms are so different. PC is so different than console, so different than mobile. You have to think about to make sure that you can build a great experience for that control scheme.
Some of these are so painfully and absurdly obvious, but it's worth mentioning because you see over and over and over people not thinking about whether these experiences fit the platform that they're bringing you to.
Yeah, they're just like, we need to port this. We're just going to make it work, and sometimes you just can't make it work. So you have to think about other things like expected session length of plays, form factor, styles of play, and screen size. So for example, in this image here, we got an Xbox 360 controller playing in a theater playing Farmville. That is the complete disjoint.
Interface is a great example of a thing that can kill a port. This wouldn't work so amazing with an analog stick on a console.
Or with a mouse.
Or with I don't think this works so great anywhere, but I mean, the VR example is pretty
Yeah,
good.
so like as I mentioned before, we did Oculus, the VR port of and shockingly to us, the biggest amount of time that it took to do that port was the menus, right? So we spent a lot of time doing the gameplay, but it was the menus that ended up eating the most amount of time just because of how different it is experiencing menus in virtual reality. So
and
this
is still
is
the
not,
worst part of the game.
Yes,
So.
yes. And the funny thing was that we realized that. We put a lot of effort into it. When we launched it, people were like, this is amazing. And it's like, you just haven't seen it done right yet, unfortunately.
Other, again, painfully obvious things that should be mentioned is, does the demographic align when you go from platform A to platform B? Because, for example, on mobile, you have a totally different group of people who are playing as kind of the general audience. So you got to think, does that work out? And then lastly, kind of the obvious, will you be able to run your game on that platform, right? So you should think about that before porting to Commodore 64 or Etch-a-Sketch. That concludes the the biz portion. So jumping into the tech side.
All right, so part 2, tech. Question is, have you been creating with multi-platform development in mind? So a very important thing to do is to abstract things. So abstract things away that could be different on different platforms. Start doing this even if there's only one thing. So for example, leaderboard manager, if you're building an iOS game, you know for a fact that the leaderboards are going to be different if you bring it to anywhere else other than iOS. So abstract that away right away. It makes your life so much easier. Another really important one is input manager. The last thing you wanted to have is your code littered with keyboard keys when you have to switch it over to a touch screen. So you have to be aware of platform-specific dependencies. So some things I mentioned before, like leaderboards, IAP, ads, analytics. These are things that only will run on a particular platform. You should obviously know at that point that these are going to be dependencies, and these are going to make porting your game to other platforms harder. So can you look for ways to reduce that, wrap that, buy plugins that can end up being across multiple platforms instead?
And from a contract standpoint, when you're brought on to port a game, basically, when they say, how long is it going to take to port this to Android? I just look through the list of what things they have in their project, and any of those in that list is basically adding another week or 2 or more to that process, because if it's all just mono code, then yeah, it's going to port extremely easily, but it's never all just Unity code.
Yep. So don't box yourself in. I still see this. The amount of people that focus on only a very few select amount of aspect ratios. Gone are the times you're like, I'm building an iPhone game, so I have one resolution, and that's all I ever need to do. The amount of resolutions is crazy, particularly if you go to something like Android, where there is a million. Just build your content in such a way that it can be scaled up and scaled down.
Yeah. And speaking of art content, when it comes to actually creating art assets, a lot of times an artist comes to us and says, okay, well, how big do you want this background? And it's like, well, no, that's not even the question I can answer for you. You just need to make it at an absurdly high size, and it needs to basically just do it vector so we can not have to deal with that. Because when you get into the point where you have title screen art and 4K screens or 8K screens become the common thing, or you're printing posters at 300 DPI, or going with making promo or anything to print, you're going to need that high-res art, and you're going to. So basically, everyone collectively who was doing iOS development back in 2010, when the iPad Retina came out, we all went, oh, crap, because we had done all of our art at 1024, at least a large portion of the indies who were trying to get things done extremely fast. So,
and it should have been pretty obvious that that was going to happen.
It's extremely obvious, and now that there's a lot of resolutions, maybe people are thinking about that a little more, but it's definitely important to note. Same with text, and you want to decouple your text. Here's a wonderful example of exactly what not to do in a game. That's all one image. So text and images is a huge no, not just from a localization standpoint, but from a workflow nightmare. It's a workflow nightmare. So if you end up needing to change one word in that file, make sure you have your artist who has the tool that it was originally made in and has the source file, so they can go in and change that and then save it over. And oh, we changed the icon, the color of the bomb in the game from red to green, and oh, our instruction screen has that baked in. It's not a referenced object or whatever.
Where did the Photoshop file go?
Yeah, exactly. Why did our artist quit? So, and the hard-coded text or any string literals in your code, that's usually a terrible nightmare. So when you get to like platform-specific culturalization of your game, when you have something like click here to continue, you're going to want that to say tap here to continue. And if you're not able to search through your entire strings file for those kinds of things, and they're all littered around the project, it can be really, really difficult. You're also, when porting, you're going to come across a lot of bottlenecks from a performance and memory standpoint, especially if you're trying to support a wide array and older devices. So we find everybody's kind of familiar with, oh, if I have a high poly model, I should make LODs, right? The concept of having kind of the scaling back of something that's performance intensive, you should have a lower poly version so that on certain platforms or at certain distances it goes down. But a lot of people I noticed don't do things like platform specific or high and low versions of things like particle systems. It's so incredibly simple. It takes about 10 seconds. So if you're building an explosion, oh, is it not going? No. Let's try clicking on it. Oh, it was not looping? Okay, yeah. It's just not looping. So when you have a high fidelity or the original created explosion, you just half all the particle emit counts and make a low version and just throw it into your project as a separate prefab. And really simply, when you spawn something like that, just have it do a platform detection, and we bucket all of our platforms into, are we on kind of a lower end-ish platform or a high-end one? And you don't need the segmentation and granularity of, okay, on Android I needed to have 57 particles come out here, and on iOS, on Retina displays or whatever. We just do high and low, and it's actually extremely useful for us to be able to limit particle counts. We even do it on animations, so we have like either a lower bone count thing or less skinning intense version of a character. You end up with less draw calls, less CPU, and we also do it with shader swaps. So a good example would be something with a reflective or specular material. You could just downgrade it to something mobile diffuse, and I think it's much better from a financial standpoint, and is to support the platform and have maybe a 10% quality reduction than to not even support said platform. So people who have those older phones, they would rather have the experience with a 10% visual reduction than to never be able to play the game. So that's something to think about. We also heavily cull things that are not absolutely necessary in games. So we do platform-dependent asset removal, which is it's so incredibly simple. It's dumb. We basically apply a component to it that says optional, and we loop over all the optional things and then remove them on low-end platforms. So if you don't absolutely need it, something that's heavy transparency, high poly elements, purely decoration objects, here it is with extras on, here it is with it off, right? So we're getting a much better frame rate without those extra decorative elements and the things that are demanding a lot of transparency. And it's a really simple, easy way to maintain your scenes from a high and low perspective.
Yeah, like our level designer did a lot of that, right? Just went and dragged files onto them, and then they just go away.
Yeah, there's no tech involved, but it's 10 seconds extra for a level designer to basically get a lot better frame rate for your game at no cost.
So what tools can end up helping you with multi-platform development? So one that we came across relatively recently is a tool called TextMesh Pro. In Discourse, we have a lot of text, and that text is rendered at a lot of different sizes. And doing bitmap fonts was killing us. I was worried that I was going to have to bake out like 7 different versions of them. And then we discovered TextMesh Pro. TextMesh Pro uses sign distance field rendering for the fonts, which means that the actual file that we output for our text was actually half the size of one of our bitmap fonts, and it looks great at every size. We get Valve to thank for doing all the research behind that. So yeah, when 8K screens come out, it doesn't matter for us when it comes to text because it's just going to look awesome. There's actually a booth here, Stefan. He's actually showing off TextMesh Pro outside. So one we start using a lot is a tool called InControl. It's also in the asset store, as was TextMesh Pro. This magically handles input. Input is terrible. If you saw the talk earlier today, talking about fixing things, but until then, this is a great solution to handle tons of different inputs. And it also has a very active Git repository. So when you need an Xbox One controller support, you just go grab a file and drop it in. It does require a little bit of technical knowledge to use and set up, but it is incredibly easy to use. We use Prime31 tools for plugins like IAP, leaderboards, all that kind of stuff. We've been using Prime31 plugins forever. Mike DeSero, his stuff is great, and the funny thing is we realized when making the slide that we had actually mentioned Prime31 in every single Unite talk we have done.
It's Prime31ception. Yeah. We also use a tool that we created during the development of Snuggle Truck back in the day called Multiplatform Toolkit, which is available in the asset store. So basically, we needed a way to handle all the kind of idiosyncrasies between platforms within that same Unity project. So it's a very simple method of maintaining kind of platform-specific data hinted on an object. So that metadata is stored on a per object basis. So if you have something like a button on your screen and you want it to be 2x the size on Android, but you want it to be moved over and pinned to the bottom left on PC, and it's a quit button, and quit doesn't exist on mobile, so you say don't even show this on these platforms, so destroy it on these, or swap this texture for this, or scale my my elements to work with 16:9, 16:10, 4:3, 3:2, or something even like text replacement, so click here, tap here. You're able to just hint that data through a little inspector component, and it's pretty simple to use, so you could check that out on the asset store.
All right, so even with a great engine, solid tools, and adequate planning, multi-platform development can go and will go very wrong. Pad your schedules accordingly. You will hit the most arcane bugs that are sometimes in Unity and sometimes in the platform themselves. So that concludes the tech part, but there is a third part, we lied. Other junk that we couldn't actually fit under biz and tech.
Part 3, what are the side effects of multi-platform development? So honestly, we don't hear a lot of people talking about this kind of dark underbelly of doing multi-platform development, and I kind of want to go into the issues that come about kind of psychologically. So when you're shifting focus and building for a wide array of platforms, you could end up spreading yourself too thin. From a production standpoint. So if you're focusing on a million tiny things instead of just doing the one thing really well, that can be a problem, especially if you're, for example, if you're sim shipping a game across a lot of different platforms that are very dissimilar, so you're doing a console and a PC and a mobile version all at the same time, we have kind of found that we really don't recommend doing dissimilar ports simultaneously, just because you don't want to split your focus as a very small team. And that can lead to, I guess, mental overload from kind of like a process overhead type of standpoint. So when you're designing something and you're thinking about, okay, I'm implementing this feature, but that's not going to work on this generation of mobile devices. So I'm not even going to design it this way. I'm going to kind of remove that feature and do it in a much simpler, less interesting way. You start thinking about all these issues that can crop up, and when you know all the idiosyncrasies of each platform, it kind of hinders your design process.
And slows down your development.
Oh yeah, 100%. It definitely can. And so I worry about the concept of compromising your design when thinking about wide distribution of multi-platform. So if you're saying, okay, none of these features are going to work on this platform, therefore we'll just cut it from the entire process, you might be damaging the integrity of your game design from a fundamental standpoint. So you got to watch out for kind of building for a lowest common denominator set of features. It's just something to think about.
It's better to have an amazing game that only works on one platform than a crappy game that works kind of on 8. You just have to think about that. Sometimes a great idea just can't be brought to particular platforms. So this is one that's very easily overlooked because it's a little bit later in the cycle. It's dealing with updates. So now that you're on 8 different platforms and you want to push an update, now that means 8 different updates. All the testing that's involved with that. Approval times on platforms are completely different. So if you want things synchronized, that can be a big problem. And sometimes you end up having contracts that require synchronicity across platforms, which can make things even harder. And to complicate things even more, sometimes an update makes a lot of sense on a particular platform, but not on others. So you got to keep all of that in mind. It is incredibly easy to waste time as a developer if you're not careful. You have to know the bottlenecks of each platform. So for example, spending 3 days optimizing your code when actually the issue is a fill rate issue, which I've seen time and again, is just a waste of time. Know why your platforms aren't doing what you need them to do. And don't optimize too early when you don't even know the platforms you're going to. So spending a lot of time trying to make sure iPad 1 works is probably not a good idea if you're launching in 2 years. This stuff can be very easy to be focused on, I want this game to run amazing on this platform, and not, is that a good platform when I'm going to ship? So to try to figure out all those bottlenecks and everything like that, it requires your company to be set up correctly. So how do you set up a company to handle multi-platform development? So we've discovered that when it comes to team building, it's great to have a good team of generalists. So people that have been through the pipe before, they've been to multiple platforms, they can spot the hazards before they come. So before you actually spend a bunch of time implementing something, they will know enough to be like, wait a second, when we bring it to this platform, that's going to cause us a huge problem. That saves you a lot of time, effort, energy, and headache. But on the other side of things, it's specialists. When you end up coming to different platforms, odds are you're going to run into platform-specific problems. And you never know when you're going to need an expert in a particular platform. It's not necessarily necessary to have specialists full-time on your team, because as you go to lots of different platforms, you're going to need a lot of different skill sets. But it's great to have a Rolodex of people that you can reach out to, talk to, and give contracts to get you past these kind of hurdles.
So we kind of felt the pain points of bringing our games to multiple platforms fairly recently, I guess in the past year. And we decided to bring on a porting engineer full-time to help us out. And there's some pros and cons to that, but I think it's important to note that you don't necessarily, if you're designing original games and trying to do kind of like in sequence, next original game, you don't want your core team of designers kind of doing these quote unquote easy ports, not necessarily that easy, but you kind of want the core competencies of your team to be doing what they do best. So we brought on our porting engineer, and one thing we noticed is that having intimate knowledge of the code base before doing the port is extremely important. So since our guy is familiar with Jack Lumber and Snuggle Truck and our back catalog, he's much faster when it comes to here's an opportunity. Unity just announced that they're porting to Etch-a-Sketch or whatever it is. And he's able to go in, he knows all the points where there's going to be problems. He can take care of that and get it to the platform as soon as humanly possible. And when also there's kind of a downfall of if you work with an external studio and you say, okay, we're just going to hand you all of our stuff and you're going to make it work on this platform, you can end up really easily, as long as you're depending on what source control you're using and all that, they might want to just completely branch or duplicate the project and do all their changes there and kind of have now a standalone separate project, which is this other platform, which I'm sure there's probably a lot of people in the audience who just went, like they just know the pain of that. And the fact that you can't branch it back in, and now you have two separate things, and now you're just sitting there with a pile of empty, dead platforms that it's really bad.
Someone wants an update, and you're like, oh no, I have to update 4 projects now.
Yeah, exactly. So when you have someone on the team who's working within that single project, this big conglomerate project, they can make the changes and wrap it properly and take care of the issues that kind of come up there.
Another thing is that this doesn't divide focus of the company. When you ship a game, we'll be doing ports possibly 2-3 years after. The overhead of us having to think about that all the time for 2-3 years while we're working on other titles is not understated. That's a lot of wasted overhead when you're thinking about things and worrying about stuff. So having this dedicated person takes a lot of that stress away from us.
Right. And as far as remaining agile as a small company, we were able to seize the little examples of seizing opportunities because we were able to pivot and work quickly. For example, one was, if you remember, like 2 years ago, Unity released their Stage 3D support, which is now defunct. And they did a Flash in a Flash porting contest over Christmas and New Year's and said, okay, anybody who wants to bring a game to this platform, try it out. And so we were able to drop what we were doing and basically in a week and a half we actually brought to Flash, and that ended up not only did we get some prizes from getting second place in that, but it ended up landing some contracts in Flash porting, and it opened a lot of doors. Again, that kind of like long-term, long play type of thing. It was more valuable than just here's what the end result of the prize set was. And then same with Oculus, the VR version, with that being the top download game on Oculus Share. It's not like it's brought in money, but we were able to, when the Oculus Kickstarter happened, we said, we have a game that is almost like it was designed for VR. It's pretty much perfect. So we were able to just jump on that. We dropped everything we were doing again for a month to do the port, and that was really, really valuable for us. So,
So we find that it's really good as a company to keep a healthy mix of risk. So a healthy mix between good early platforms and good mature platforms. This kind of levels out the risk and keeps the risk from getting too high. So right now as a company, the early platform we're focused on is VR. We're doing a lot of stuff there, but it is incredibly risky, but it also has the greatest chance of explosive growth. And then on the other side of things, we're focusing on Steam as our mature platform, and that's where we're bringing Discourse. We've brought multiple titles to Steam already. We know kind of what to expect, and that's kind of stabilizing our risk there.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it, but TLDR, game development is hard. Porting is relatively easy if you're using Unity, ***. Be smart with your time, because time is money. Do your research before porting. Especially talk to others who have been through the pipe. I cannot stress that enough, that is your primary way of avoiding pain, failure, and all these other kinds of things. And don't forget to leverage the existing games that you have in your portfolio. If you've made something in the past, it likely still has value, and there's probably a group of people who are waiting to see that IP in a different spot. And doing those kinds of ports and taking risks and doing that can attract new opportunities that you don't really understand until you've gone through the pipe and then look back. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'd love to take some questions now. If good. Are those mics on?
You could just yell, Devin.
We'll repeat.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about how designing for multiple platforms or future platforms builds into your initial game concepts, and if it does?
I think a really good analogy of this is how Discourse ended up playing out. So early on, Alex and I talked, and we decided that we wanted to build the best PC experience we possibly could, and not to get too bogged down thinking about other potential platforms we could bring it to in the future.
Especially because we had just done a mobile-first game and then followed it up with another mobile-first game, and we were seeing some problems with that order of porting, of going mobile and then to other platforms, that there's some value judgments made on certain platforms when it's really not the case. It's still a game of substantial quality and size. But.
Yeah, and so what ended up happening is early in development, the game was very, very click-heavy, pointing, and that kind of thing. And we didn't worry too much about it because we were very PC focused. But as the design of the game changed, some of that really heavy mouse requirement kind of just fell away on its own. So now the game is a bit more portable due to that. And we're glad we went through that approach because it kind of naturally evolved. And if we had gone early and been like, how do we make this work everywhere, we would have turned out a much worse product.
Your platform-dependent asset removal system, is that part of your build process, or do you do that at load time?
So we do that at runtime. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So the question was, is it a post process?
The platform-specific asset removal process, is that happening at runtime or build time?
Yeah. So we do it at runtime. There's a lot of reasons for this. I mean, there's some things that we do per platform, but this high and low, for example, on Android devices, there are so many different ones that shipping a different build for all these different Android devices would be very painful. So we do it at runtime most of the time.
Yeah, mostly those were examples of frame rate increase, right? So, but when you're thinking about, oh, I have all these HD and SD atlases and I want to swap out and back and forth, that's a totally different, runtime memory usage, and smaller devices don't need the high-end, PC-sized textures and all that. And that's still a major problem in Unity, and they're working on their virtual assets and asset bundles per platform. And so I'm hoping that that helps with it. But we found ways to kind of work around needing to swap textures either at build time or before it actually loads in the first set of textures, where you basically remove the reference to the texture from your material or object, and then you would resources.load based on what platform or HD or SD. So the only problem is from workflow standpoint is you end up with a white square, which then when you hit play turns into whatever atlas you want. So there's definitely workflow problems when it comes to keeping your initial scene load to the smallest set of textures and objects. But in that case, they were all prefabs that were already going to be there anyway. You could just kind of not show them at runtime.
Any other? Yeah, back there.
So you guys have a methodology for all the different Android things that are out there, sort of like, as my example, Hoya, Amazon, and Android are all using an Android folder, right? So you have to rename their specific crowd to Android when you build for them. Do you have like a way that you manage dealing with all three of those, or really more?
For every platform we deploy to. Oh yeah. So how do you handle all the different Android possibilities for building and? Right. So we do our own custom build process for every platform, just so that we don't, from like remembering all the things you have to check in your player settings when you're doing this specific platform, we always automate the build process. So if you were going to have an Ouya build menu, it would take care of every single thing that needed to happen to make sure that that build was solid for Ouya. So if that means actually taking something out of the assets folder temporarily so that the build would do what it needs to do, or renaming a folder or doing really stupid hacks to make that work, that's what has to happen. Because the value of doing something really small like that, like renaming a folder or moving an item into resources and back out right before the build and after the build, that takes 10 minutes, and it might be kind of gross when you look at your build process. But the alternative is having multiple versions of your project, which is vomit-inducing. So basically, every time we faction off a new platform or type of build, it's not even necessarily a platform, but when you say like, oh, a press demo build for Steam, or all these kinds of weird builds you might need to do, we always automate that through a build process.
Yeah, we never use the build and run in the actual menu.
That's actually, we still need to file a bug report for that, is that we cannot remove the file build option. In fact, we added a new option below it that says, do not click the thing above this, and it has an arrow. We're just trying to make it so that no one can ever click and open the build menu, and it's not possible right now. Just from a, sometimes it's late night and you accidentally go file build, and you should never be doing that.
Yeah.
Question about your testing and your QA process. Like you talked about updating the title and having to release an update on different platforms. As a small studio, how do you handle testing all the different versions of the platform?
So the question is about handling testing all the different versions of.
First off, what is QAing? Because I don't know what that is.
It's really challenging as a small studio because you just can't have like a dedicated QA team. Unfortunately, a lot of that just falls on us to do, which is less than optimal, but I don't see at our current size a better solution to that problem. We make errors. Actually, as a funny anecdote, we accidentally built a Steam release a couple days ago with the wrong Unity key, and then it went up saying trial version on it, and people are like, why did the game become trial? Oh no, and then so we have to go resolve that. But yeah, it's very hard. I just don't have a good solution to that problem.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. Until you have the capital to have someone on board full-time to do that. I don't know, part-time QA might be a solution, or some kind of build vetting process that's a little better than what we have, but we haven't gotten to that point where we've attempted to try it.
Yeah, there's one up here.
Continuing on that, do you have any implemented build and test process to make sure that whatever new feature you make still works on all the platforms that you make?
So the
Playing the game as quickly as possible.
So the
on
question was,
other
do we
platforms.
have any automated mechanism or anything to test to make sure when we make a change that it doesn't negatively impact other platforms? No. Games are so hard. Like I come from a software development background, and it's so much easier. You know, I'm writing test suites and stuff like that. With games, that becomes so hard because you end up having to waste so much time making sure your test suites are working, because it's better for us to be more agile and accidentally make mistakes than it is to slow down our development process.
If when we started Alchemy Labs, we said set an edict that we're going to set up a nice test suite for every build that we do and all that, we likely would have gone out of business because it would have taken us maybe another whatever it was 20% extra, and we had such a heavy trimming the fat in order to stay ramen profitable at the beginning and all that. It's really scary to actually think about what would have happened if it took us 20% longer to do everything in Unity, and that could have killed us, honestly.
Yeah. Now, obviously, like certain platforms we are more careful on than others. So, for example, if we have a very important iOS update to go out, we are going to be really careful because the turnaround times on approvals are so much longer than on other platforms where it's instantaneous. And sometimes the players are happy to just tell us, oh, do you know what, this thing didn't work, and then we'll quickly do an update to it, and most people will never know. So
it's also just having clean wrapping of functionality. Like, for example, with all of our Oculus stuff, we have because it's a Steam game that's PC, Mac, and Linux, and it also has the VR component, we have to make sure that both worlds work. And so when we're adding VR features, if he commits something that adds a new feature to the VR, I'll make sure that I look over the change set and see if he's typed anything that's not wrapped in it if VR supported, because that's usually the case where you're going to end up with the bugs. So just trying to identify where the mistakes happen and be kind of vigilant on the commits and stuff, that's another way to at least try to prevent the bugs.
Joe, who's next?
Yeah. We're next.
You mentioned you're not a QA team. How big is Alchemy Labs today?
Okay, so
The question was,
yes,
how big is Alchemy Labs?
Terrible at repeating the question. Okay, so I get that question a lot, and it's a longer answer than a number. So we have a core team at Alchemy that was 3 all along, and we just recently brought on another member into this core team, so it's 4. And when I say core team, these are people who are heavily invested in multiple projects over the course of the company, but we operate in a very project-centric way. So for example, we have 7 people working on Discourse, 3 of which are either freelancers or people who own their own indie company or collaborators to some extent, and they come on board and they're working with us and they're happy, and they might even have revenue share on the product. There's a lot of things that can be interesting with working with partners, and they're not even under the impression that the next game that Alchemy makes they'll be involved in, and that's not a negative. It's actually a positive for them because they like to, a lot of people like to work on interesting things and then kind of hop around. So from a standpoint of core team, 4, currently on Discourse we have 7. Jack Lumber, we were at 9 at the end of development, but the number of freelancers in kind of our network for if we need some really crazy shader stuff, we call up Devin and, hey. Just that number is, I don't know, 20, 30, 40. So how do you judge the size of the company? Great question.
Yeah, it allows us to be very, very agile and to not cramp our vision on new projects to who we have on the team. So for example, Discourse, we've never needed a full-time writer before. And it is quite possible after this game, we might not need one for a while. So the person we're working with there, we know that we're going to work on discourse together. And that allows us to kind of work on lots of different stuff.
And that avoids butts in seats, burn rate of people who are not doing anything that is productive to the company.
And the really awful thing of companies laying people off, right? That's just unacceptable for us.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you were next.
Can you talk a little bit more about managers and platform-specific plugins? You
Yeah.
have an example like input and leaderboards and achievements. It sounds like you had a plugin for input, but what do you do about leaderboards and achievements? Because that seems like that.
Okay, so the question is, what kind of tools do we use to handle some of the more platform-specific things like leaderboards and stuff like that? So they work across lots of different things. Do you want to?
I mean, honestly, once we write something like abstracting a certain system kind of in a generic way, we'll just copy it between our projects because it's such a, it's meant to plug and play all these different platforms, and you don't necessarily know which platforms you're going to hook in, but it's really just from like a design pattern type of standpoint, you're going to want to make sure that you're not just throwing in like the equivalent of string literals or key, if key downs or all those kinds of things. So I guess over time we continue to wrap up more and more of our systems into kind of higher level procedures.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's so fluid that it's not stable enough that one could just like release it to everyone.
Right.
It's kind of so platform dependent sometimes, but that's just kind of how that goes. It's
So
painful.
the question of which tools do we use, it's all just homebrew.
Up there.
What do you use for version control?
So the question is, what do we use for version control? We use Asset Server. We found that for our team structure, it works great because it's so easy to use. Ramp up time on someone learning to use Asset Server is almost zero. You hit the commit button. So that works. It does the trick for us. So.
Right. From a designer and art standpoint, an artist standpoint, super easy. You get into all the problems of not having all the fully featured branching and all those things. But we also, so first off, they're talking about in the future a much better integrated in Unity support for version control. That is music to my ears, and I think the concept of having to switch out, like, and we've experimented with Perforce and all these other, just having to switch out of Unity and having a separate file list and dealing with the external locking and all that is just, it doesn't, I guess, jive with the original flow that we felt Asset Server did really well. And so we're hoping that they do a much more integrated version of that going forward. And another part of the question was, we only put game code and game assets in Asset Server. We do a dual version control system where we use Dropbox for everything else, which is kind of any marketing materials, in-game screenshots, video, press snippets, source art from higher res source art, or any binary files or anything. Pretty much the whole project's life is in Dropbox, organized, and then you have the game assets on the other side.
Right in the center.
So this kind of plays into the question that you guys answered before, but what do you do on an actual code level for making the code still readable for like platform detection, resolution size, and everything without having 50 different defines or a bunch of clauses in the code to...
So the question is, how do we handle, without mucking up the code too bad, how do you make all these different platforms exist together? It's a mess. I don't see any way around it. Sometimes when there's a very specific platform, we make new classes that just exist unto themselves. But yeah, sometimes you get in a situation where it's just tons and tons of if defines.
But again, there are solutions to that. There are design patterns to kind of do it properly, and I'm sure you guys have more experience with kind of the right way of doing it. We are definitely attempting to balance that time versus cleanliness type of thing. And so clean enough that it's still, we can change the code, but not that we're wasting time kind of on priming and primping our code to look the best, I guess. And I think we have 30 seconds, right? 30 seconds, one more.
One more.
Yes.
So I noticed that you got Flash export working. Of course, it's also the web player, but
Yep.
looking at your revenue, you're not getting anything from web.
Correct. Yeah, we didn't.
Why is
pursue that as an actual. We weren't really trying to make money on that platform because we didn't find any platforms that kind of fit that healthy, money-making proposition, right? So there's Congregate, and there's some interesting stuff going on there, and we actually used that way back in the day before we released Snuggle Truck to put a level editor up there that you could interact with and all this stuff. But I don't know. I think the web is a totally different ecosystem, and I think it's very hard to get kind of deeper, especially 3D Unity games, and there's the whole plugin bounce back issue, and now that WebGL is becoming a thing, I think that opens a whole new door to getting plugin-free content out on the web, but I'm just not sure. It's so early from trying to monetize that kind of content, that's really tough. So the slice is small because the slice is small. I think that's pretty much, there's very few people pursuing the financial side of web games, not without like a shotgun approach, like addicting games. And so that is it.
That's it.
Thanks, everyone.